I spent the first 12 years of my working life in the military, where the definition of dynamic working is you go where we tell you, when we tell you, and I don't care if that means you miss your wedding, right? And then I moved in 2000 to work for an American investment bank. And if I'm brutally honest, it wasn't that much different. And in 2008, I joined Barclays. And I absolutely remember my first couple of days at Barclays. Coming onto the floor, and I had a team of sort of 25 people who worked sort of directly for and with me. And I could only see 10 of them. I was like, well, where is everybody? And I remember my PA basically saying, well, this person works from home on Thursdays, and this person's currently working from this branch, and this person's doing this. How do I get anything done when I can't see the people? And I genuinely, really, really struggled with this. I thought I was a good leader. You know, 12 years in the military, 8 years, I thought I knew what I was doing. And I actually didn't know how to lead in an environment where I couldn't see all the people around me. So I kind of struggled on for about a year. And then my wife got sick. Not dangerously sick, not life-threatening. That annoying kind of sickness that involves very short notice, trips to the hospital, extended stays, care at home, and all that sort of stuff. And I found myself needing to work flexibly. I went from the guy who was sort of renowned as the 7 days a week. He seems to be on his email 24 hours a day. You know, he's always there. You give Ian the really difficult things to get done, because I was a COO for a long time, and that's what my role was, to being the person who couldn't be there. So I did start working dynamically. I was very lucky. I had bosses who really understood and were very supportive. But then I get to the bit that I am most ashamed of in the story. I hid it. I was incredibly proud of the fact that nobody knew that I was dialing into that conference call from the hospital bedside. Really proud of it. And I was really proud of the fact that I was one of the most senior person who worked dynamically, and still nobody knew. And I have to say, there was this one moment where a senior female leader, and we'd actually sat in a meeting talking about dynamic working and diversity, and she grabbed me after the meeting, literally physically grabbed me, said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" Because she knew that I worked dynamically. She said, "Why aren't you talking about this?" And I had this sudden dawning moment of realizing what I'd been doing and what I had been missing. So I've become that ex-smoker, right, that nightmare ex-smoker on this issue. Because I then started to really think about it, and I did start to talk about it. She literally forced me on a stage like this and got me to start talking. And as I started talking about it, people started talking to me. And as I became a leader, I started, with more scale leadership, I started talking to my leaders about it, and they started talking to me. And I realized just how absolutely fundamental this is to the culture of the organization you're trying to build. The Lord Mayor referred to it. If you don't have a culture that supports dynamic working, you do not have a culture that supports diversity. Full stop. Full stop. I chair the Diversity Council for Barclays in the UK. It is incredible. No matter what is on the agenda, every time that agenda moves to dynamic working. If you want to focus on mental health in the workplace, you end up talking about dynamic working. You want to start talking about more senior female leaders. That's obviously, everyone realizes that is dynamic working. We get that. But if you want to talk about racial and religious diversity, if you don't create the culture that allows somebody to turn around to their boss and say, because of my community norms, I won't be in the office tomorrow afternoon, you're not going to create religious and cultural diversity either. It is genuinely the absolute underpinning. So that's the first thing we learned. The second thing I realized is how hard this is. And it's okay to talk about making this work is hard culturally. Because if you're sitting there with a team, kind of like I was in the early days, when you've got this amount of work to do, and you've got this many people who work this many hours, that adds up to the work to be done. And when someone says, I really want to do this differently, it's hard. So acknowledge it's hard. Give managers the license to say, I don't know how to do this, I'm struggling with it, and then help them. Because the one thing that you really must know is, making this work depends on the leaders on the ground. You can do all the campaigns you like. I can stand up on stage. I look after 3,500 people now. I can do all the town halls I like. But if somebody working in the branch in Basingstoke doesn't feel comfortable telling their boss that they have a need for dynamic working, I've wasted my time. So it's all about the on-the-ground leadership and training the on-the-ground leadership to be comfortable about this. So you've got to find ways that make it relevant to those on-the-ground leaders. So that's why I've started, I tell my story a lot more now. But again, and the law may refer to it, if I find myself standing up on a stage like this and I see a whole bunch of middle-aged male managers out there and I can start to see the cynicism in the eyes and all the rest of it, I say to them, any of you who think that dynamic working is the thing that women do when they come back from maternity leave, you haven't met elder care yet. And you can suddenly see a pause in the room because they're all going, oh yeah, my mum's 300 miles away. And if I need to go and sort her out, I don't want to be doing that, traveling on a Friday night, traveling back on a Sunday night. So it matters for everybody. We have done a number of things in Barclays that have helped, but I have to say talking about it has been the most important, But we also acknowledge, as I said, to these leaders that it is hard, and they need to come and talk about it with us. So we'll cover lots of this in the Q&A, I hope. A couple of very practical things. We've made it clear this is not an HR function. It's very interesting. We tried a couple of runs at this. Sometimes we talked about the policy and we set up this big framework for you to apply and do all this. Absolute rubbish. Stop that. Right? It has to be something that managers talk about, because the vast, vast majority of flexible working arrangements actually mean me saying, Nikunj, do you mind if I work from home on Friday? Right? So the moment you create this atmosphere that I've actually got to fill out a form before I can even ask that question, both Nikunj as my leader says, no, this is a formality thing, and I think it's a formality thing. You've got to make the culture that says, I can just go and say I need to work from home on a Friday. And when you do that, you suddenly see the benefits. I'll tell you one that we weren't expecting. So we do have the challenge, obviously, that we have women coming back from maternity leave, many of whom will look to work dynamically. And trying to pair that up and make it work in a client-facing environment can be tough. Who looks after the clients the other 2 days a week? Here's what we weren't expecting. When you look at the demographics of client-facing businesses, there's one thing they've got an awful lot of right now. Blokes in their late 50s approaching retirement. And actually, a whole bunch of those are saying, I'd quite like to do a nice, gentle runoff. I don't want to do a cliff edge. And so what we've actually found right now, some of our most successful client-facing job shares are where we've got sort of younger women coming back from having a family and actually being able to part-time 3 days a week with somebody approaching the end of their career 3 days a week. Oh, that's really interesting, right? It's not something we've seen. We talk a lot about the millennials. We talk a lot about women coming back from maternity. But the other thing we learned is it's the little things that matter. It's the little words. I'm a big fan of this broader piece of kind of diversity work, but particularly on gender diversity, a bit of work done by Elizabeth Kellen for Cranfield, which talks about micro behaviors. And I think in dynamic working, micro behaviors is critical. And let me give you an example of where, bluntly, I still get it wrong. I've got a guy in my team who comes in at 10 o'clock 2 days a week because he does the school run. I've known that for years. It's absolutely well established, no problem at all. We were talking about something blew up, and we needed to have a meeting the following day. So a group of us were together. He wasn't there. And we were talking about the fact we needed to get together. I said, right, let's get together, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. We've got to really work this out. And I said, oh, we can't do that because John comes in late on Thursdays. Wrong word. Doesn't come in late. Comes in at 10 o'clock. That's not late. That's the time that John comes in on Thursdays. Now, my heart's in the right place. I still use those words. But everyone's heard late. So getting those micro behaviors right for all of us, and then acknowledging it and saying, I didn't mean late. He comes in at 10, and that's fine. Acknowledging that. So that's my big lessons. Acknowledge it's hard. Give people a license to ask for help. Talk to the leaders. Talk to the leaders, because they're the people who make it work on the ground. Don't make it formal, because that's not culture then, that's process. and make it work for everybody. Talking to the middle-aged blokes about what dynamic working could mean to them is as important about talking to the millennials, to the women coming back from maternity.